Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Market Update, where we discuss leading financial and economic developments in Europe, Asia, and North America. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And first up, before we move into the main US story, we note that Wall Street rallied on yesterday, with the S&P 500 climbing to a record high as data signaled a cooling labor market, reinforcing expectations of Federal Reserve rate cuts. Reports on hiring and unemployment claims come ahead of Friday's jobs release, predicted to extend the weakest stretch of US job growth since the pandemic. Two-year Treasury yields hovered near year-long lows, while money markets nearly fully priced in a rate cut this month, and at least two by year-end. Economists see rising risks to employment pushing Fed officials to ease borrowing costs soon. Okay, now for the main US story. US President Donald Trump has asked the US Supreme Court to swiftly uphold his sweeping global tariffs in a case that could reshape the world trading system, with literally trillions at stake, and determine the extent of presidential power over the economy. The administration is seeking an expedited schedule, with arguments in early November following a federal appeals court ruling that said Trump exceeded his authority by invoking a 1977 emergency law to impose wide-scale import taxes. The levies, known as Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, marked the sharpest rise in US import duties since the 1930s, pushing the effective tariff rate to 16.3%, its highest in more than a century. The financial implications are enormous. A defeat for Trump would likely cut average tariffs by at least half, and could force the government to refund tens of billions of dollars to importers. It could also undermine preliminary trade agreements with countries such as Canada, Mexico, and China, where tariffs were linked to issues like fentanyl trafficking. Though the appeals court ruled against him, the tariffs remain in effect while the case proceeds. The Solicitor General warned that if the decision stands, it would, quote, unilaterally disarm the United States, end quote, in trade negotiations and embolden foreign retaliation. At issue is the scope of the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, which allows presidents to regulate imports during national emergencies. Both the Court of International Trade and the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit held that the statute does not authorize tariffs, stressing that the Constitution grants Congress, rather than the President, the power to tax and set duties. Quote, the statute bestows significant authority, end quote, the appeals court wrote, adding, quote, but none of these actions explicitly include the power to impose tariffs, duties, or the like, end quote. The challengers, which include Democratic-led states and small businesses, argue that a trade deficit is not the kind of, quote, extraordinary threat, end quote, envisioned by the law. The administration counters that the power to regulate importation inherently includes the authority to impose tariffs, especially if it is part of a wider policy set of actions to counter damaging foreign industrial policy. A favorable Supreme Court ruling could effectively remove limits on the president's ability to declare emergencies and reshape trade flows. The stakes extend beyond the courtroom. A ruling against the US president would weaken his negotiating hand in ongoing foreign talks and reduce the tariff pressure he has wielded against rivals and allies alike. A win, by contrast, would grant the presidency broad leverage over global commerce for years to come. The Supreme Court is expected to decide soon whether it will hear the case, with the administration urging a decision by the 10th of September. If arguments proceed in November, a ruling could arrive by year-end, just as the US president intensifies his push to redefine America's role in the global economy. And on this theme, and next up, we move to Asia. Japanese automakers surged in Tokyo trading today, after US President Donald Trump signed an executive order formalizing a deal to cap tariffs on the sector at 15%, easing investor concerns over trade frictions. The Topex Index's auto subgauge jumped as much as 2.8% in early trading, its strongest advance in a month, before moderating to a 0.6% gain by late morning. Mazda Motor Corp and Nissan Motor Corp, which derive more than half of their revenues from North America, climbed more than 5% at one stage. Toyota Motor Corp gained as much as 3.5%, though it pared back to trade about 0.5% higher. Quote, "This should be seen as good news for the auto sector, where tariff risk has weighed most heavily," end quote, said Philip Wood, head of portfolio manager at Reliant Global Advisors, adding, quote, "We see Japanese automakers as likely to continue gaining market share versus international competitors," end quote. The order implements a July agreement lowering levies on US imports of Japanese cars to 15% from the previous 27.5%, offering relief to a sector hammered by Trump's Liberation Day tariff shock in April. Auto and parts makers had tumbled more than 6% in the 2 weeks after those announcements. Still, some analysts urged caution. Quote, "Companies' ability to implement tariff countermeasures remain to be seen," end quote, said an analyst at Tokai Tokyo Intelligence Laboratory. The analyst noted that much of the rally had already been priced in after the July deal, suggesting Friday's bounce could be short-lived. The tariff news coincided with fresh data published today showing Japanese wages rising at their fastest pace in 7 months. Nominal pay climbed 4.1% in July from a year earlier, outstripping forecasts and bolstering expectations that the Bank of Japan could lift rates again this year. Real wages adjusted for inflation rose 0.5%, marking the first increase of 2025. Kohei Okazaki, chief market economist at Nomura Securities, said the data indicate, quote, "The domestic economy is at least positive," end quote, and give confidence that household demand can offset some external shocks. Private consumption has grown for 5 straight quarters, supported by both rising wages and government stimulus measures. For automakers, however, profits remain under strain. Toyota recently warned of a 1.4 trillion yen, $9.4 billion hit from tariffs, while industry-wide pre-tax profits fell 11.5% in the April through June quarter. Whether higher pay and steadier demand can counterbalance export headwinds remains uncertain. Now, we have one more development to cover, but just quickly, if you want to be on top of the biggest developments in the world's most important markets, consider subscribing to Market Update. Hit the bell notification icon and you will be. And if you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. And finally, we end on Europe, and this next story is to supplement what we discussed on Monday. The UK is in advanced negotiations to supply warships to Denmark and Sweden, a move that could deliver a major boost to Scottish shipbuilders and reinforce Britain's defence industry at a critical moment for European security. The talks follow the UK's landmark deal with Norway, announced on Sunday, and which we covered in Monday's episode, marking the largest warship export order in the country's history. The discussions centre on Babcock International's Type 31 Arrowhead 140 frigates. An agreement with Denmark was, quote, "very close, almost nailed on," end quote, according to a report from UK-based The Financial Times, while negotiations with Sweden were, quote, "very positive," end quote, according to a report from UK-based Reuters, but with more complexities. Copenhagen is expected to order 3 frigates this month, with the possibility of building additional vessels domestically, while Stockholm is weighing an order for 4 frigates alongside a rival French order. Sweden's procurement agency is due to decide by the end of the year. The potential deals would represent a major vote of confidence in the UK's defence sector, which Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has promoted as a pillar of his government's economic growth strategy. At around £250 million per ship, the contracts would also help sustain thousands of jobs in Scotland's shipyards. It's also hoped that such agreements would strengthen and deepen relationships with Scandinavian allies as they work to deter Russian aggression in the Arctic and North Atlantic. The Danish Defence Minister confirmed his country's intent to collaborate with an international partner, telling local media, quote, "This can be done in many different ways, but what is clear to me is that Denmark cannot do it alone," end quote. The Ministry of Defence said it was, quote, "committed," end quote, to supporting Babcock in negotiations, adding that the Type 31 programme, quote, "continues to attract significant interest from potential international partners, underlying the strength of the UK defence industry and shipbuilding capability," end quote. Still, France remains a formidable competitor. Paris signed a defence cooperation roadmap with Stockholm in June, and its own bid for Sweden's frigate order could yet undercut London's. The final decision rests with Sweden's procurement agency, which has indicated a ruling could come within months. The new export push follows the UK-Norway deal for 5 BAE Systems Type 26 submarine hunting frigates to be built largely in Glasgow, securing BAE's order book for a decade. Together, the Scandinavian contracts highlight how Northern Europe is moving to bolster naval capabilities as Russia's submarine activity in the Arctic grows and as America's future security commitments to Europe are somewhat in question. Sweden, which joined NATO in 2024 after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Denmark, a founding NATO member, both see strengthening naval power as central to their security strategies. If finished, the deals would further cement Britain as the leading supplier of advanced warships to its northern European allies. Okay, that is today's episode of Market Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Friday, have a restful weekend, and I will see you for a new episode and a new week on Monday.